Hello, in just a moment we've got the press preview for you. I'll look at what's in the morning papers. First though, a reminder of our top stories here this evening. And President Trump has vowed to overturn a court ruling against his travel ban, which he's described as ridiculous. Demonstrators have marched through London, calling for Mr Trump's planned state visit to the UK to be cancelled. And the father of the Egyptian man accused of trying to attack soldiers with a machete at the Louvre in Paris has insisted his son is not a terrorist. Hello, you're watching the press preview on Sky News. Joining me this evening to go through the front pages is the Times columnist Matthew Syed and the writer and columnist Christina Patterson. Hello to both of you. So let's take a look at what's on those front pages of those newspapers then. And the Sunday Times leads with an investigation into Britain's defences. It says the UK has gaping holes and there are concerns the armed forces would be unable to defend against a serious military attack. The Observer reports that the government is set to unveil a series of policies to support renters. A parliamentary inquiry is set to conclude that a government investigation into historic allegations of abuse in Iraq is unfit for purpose. That story is the lead in the Sunday Telegraph. The former Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, has called for the world to give Donald Trump a chance. That's the lead for the Sunday Express. The Mail on Sunday reports that former UKIP leader Nigel Farage is sharing a £4 million bachelor pad with a French politician. Colleen Nolan, the Celebrity Big Brother winner, has credited the show with helping to save her marriage. That's according to the Daily Star Sunday. So let's talk through some of those stories and some of the stories inside the papers as well with Matthew Syed and Christina Patterson. And you've gone for a Trump story to kick us off. This is on the front of the Observer, not their main story, which is about a new policy to back renters, which we're going to come to a little bit later on. But there on the right-hand column, Trump slams the judge who blocked his travel ban. So this time last week, we were talking about this executive order of his that put in this travel ban, and now it's been blocked by a judge, and he's not happy.
Yeah, I think the policy is pretty indefensible. The judge has ruled it unconstitutional. But those who are saying that Trump is behaving in a dictatorial way by using intemperate language to disagree with the ruling of the judge, I think the language is intemperate, but he's not behaving unconstitutionally in that the federal government is obeying the ruling. They're allowing people from those 7 countries into the United States and they're appealing the decision. So I don't think this is a constitutional crisis yet that people are building up to be. And
just
we'll have
talk
to
about some of that language, because he did tweet, didn't he? He was tweeting when he got up this morning. He's been tweeting in the last hour or so. He called him a so-called judge, and he called the ruling ridiculous. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's slightly intemperate. But when the when the British Supreme Court disagreed with the government over the triggering of Article 50, the government came out and said we vigorously disagree with the judicial decision. Trump's language is slightly more energetic than that, but he is obeying the ruling. If he'd instructed the Immigration Department to continue to block people coming in, then that would have been a constitutional crisis. The only difference is the language is slightly more heated. Let's not forget Barack Obama issued executive orders that were ruled unconstitutional. He obeyed the courts. He criticised the courts, but just in slightly different language. So I just think, I think there could be, at some point, given Trump's psychology, a genuine constitutional crisis if a higher court disagrees with him and he goes over the heads of that court and instructs the federal government to disobey the court. But we're nowhere near that at this point, and I think we just have to be aware of that.
I think it's unpresidential. I don't think that the first response from the White House when this judge passed this ruling was that it was outrageous. When a major figure in the American legal system makes a pronouncement, it isn't up to you as president to say it's outrageous. You might want to, as you say, you might want to contest it, but you don't say it's outrageous, and you don't call a judge a so-called judge. That's not, I mean, that is verging on the nutty, actually. Well, it's not verging on the nutty, it is nutty. He's a judge. I mean, what does he mean by a so-called judge? Does he mean it's a fake news story that he's a judge? I mean, I just don't know what he means by it. But there is, essentially, we've had a barrage of borderline crazy tweets and policies in the last 10 days. And actually the crazy, I don't say that slightly, because a number of psychologists have suggested that he essentially suffers from something called malignant narcissistic personality disorder. And I have to say, having read quite a lot about narcissism in the past, it does look as though this isn't just someone who's a bit moody. This is someone who is quite seriously unhinged and does suffer from a personality disorder. And although, generally speaking, I don't think one should discriminate against people with mental illness, I don't think it's ideal to have, as the most powerful man in the world, somebody who's suffering from
I don't think we can diagnose that, can we?
We can't diagnose it, but I would say that there are very strong indications that he is somewhat unhinged, and I think, and he's very erratic, and he does change his mind all the time, and I think this is dangerous.
I mean, I'm definitely worried about Donald Trump, but let's not forget, there's a long tradition in the United States of respecting the decisions passed down by the judiciary because of the independence of the judicial process as codified in the Constitution, but also going after individual judges when you disagree with what they say. So that's why there's such a contested process over the selection of Supreme Court justices. You have that vigorous debate about the suitability of judges for that job, and people say we disagree fundamentally with what the judge is saying on all sorts of moral and ethical issues. But nevertheless, there's a deep tradition in America of respecting due process, so long as that judge has gone through the right process to be selected. And so far, this particular judge, by the way, was selected by, I think, was it Bush Sr. or Bush Jr.?
Bush Jr., I think, and it was 99 people voted and nobody voted again.
In the Senate,
so, yeah.
Okay, let's move on to another story. At the front page of the Sunday Times, they have an investigation which they say reveals gaps in Britain's defences. So what exactly are they alleging here?
Well, this is a bit worrying. I can't say I'm a world expert on defence equipment, but this is a bit worrying. Apparently, we're not very well. I mean, I actually think for the first time for a very long time, the world is considerably more unstable than it has been. And I do think there's a serious possibility of war under Trump's remit. I have no idea whether we'll be affected or not, but apparently there is a £1 billion submarine, which sounds like a bag of spanners and can be heard from 100 miles away. So clearly it's not particularly stealthy or going to be particularly effective. And then there are just various problems that have been highlighted here. A Type 26 frigate, which now has to be able to land a Chinook helicopter, so needs huge adaptations and so on. Essentially, the argument is that our defence equipment is not fit for purpose. And if you add to that arguments I've heard that in the last few years, because of well, in fact, in the last few months, because of the loss in the value of sterling, actually that's affected the defence budget enormously and what they can buy. So. It's not ideal, I think.
We don't have a response, I don't think, from the MOD, certainly on that front page section, but from what you read here, it does sound a bit worrying.
Oh, it's a really important investigation. I agree with Christina that with Trump in the White House, the probability of conflict is higher. I mean, a lot of the Trump supporters in the United States say you should take him seriously, but not literally, that often his escalation in rhetoric with people is part of a negotiation. And that what he's trying to do is cow others so that he secures a better deal for the United States, and he won't ever go to a point where he would really want to go to war or have very high trade barriers. We're just going to have to wait and see. I do worry about his basic psychology, and I think that makes this story even more significant, given that, God forbid, we may be in a position where we'll need our armed forces.
OK, and we're going to stay with the Trump theme a little bit further. This is inside the Sunday Express. This is to do with the EU ambassador. Is that not right? And it's Donald Trump's pick for the US ambassador in the European Union.
Who essentially hates the EU and is dying for it to fall apart and has gone on record as saying that he hates the EU and is very keen for it to collapse. So
I think he's apologised for that since, hasn't he?
Well, he may have apologised, but either way, that has been his view. And so Trump is saying that if the EU block his appointment, then he will withdraw the EU ambassador from Washington and so on. I mean, what is very worrying, there was a photo posted on Twitter today of all Trump's sort of, inner circle and all his appointees. And of course, they're all, rather elderly white guys. And there was the joke was that the diversity was in the tie colours. And in fact, there was another tweet by the deputy Swedish Prime Minister about some deal that had been signed, and she was surrounded surrounded by women. I'm very pleased to say I'm half Swedish, and I would put myself in that camp, because I think Trump must have appointed the most undiverse group of people ever. They're all complete hawks, and many of them even retired for a long time. They've been kind of, dredged out of retirement. But on the war point, Steve Bannon, who's his chief of staff and probably the most powerful person in the White House now, chair of Breitbart, which is essentially the kind of mouthpiece for the so-called alt-right. He believes in war. He wants a war, apparently. And so I do think there is a really serious risk there.
But just on Ted Malloch, by the way, he also compared the EU to the Soviet Union bloc. But he does have, if you want to know, the 100% support of Boris Johnson.
Oh, great. Well, that's all right.
The kiss of death right there. But the Brits are behind him.
OK, we're going to take a break. We've got lots more to talk about after the break, though. Don't go anywhere. Plenty more to come up, including we're going to talk a little bit about those things you wear around your wrist that tell you how many steps you're doing. Have they got it right? Some suggest not. You join us as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers with Times columnist Matthew Syed and the writer and columnist Christina Patterson. And you've picked out the Mail on Sunday's front page story to kick off this section concerning Nigel Farage. So what is it that they're alleging here?
So this is about Laura Ferrari, who met Nigel Farage when she was a waitress in a restaurant in Strasbourg, then became a researcher for Godfrey Bloom, who was also having dinner on that night, then became the head of a right-wing think tank, is now accused of funneling £400,000 illegally to UKIP, and the more frivolous allegation is that she's also having an affair with Farage that he denies.
Well, yes,
I'm just trying to summarise.
That was very good.
3 pages into one.
He says it's absolutely crackers, doesn't he, Ian? Ridiculous, that the suggestion that they're having an affair. I think he's acknowledged that she's living at his house, but because he was helping her out with somewhere to live. And there are investigations underway. Again, Nigel Farage absolutely denies claims of wrongdoing, but it's certainly taken up a few column inches.
Yeah, I mean, the serious bit of the story is the allegation that she funneled money to UKIP illegally, and it's definitely the case that UKIP are currently under investigation for breaking the rules, and they've admitted they're sharing a house together and they met when she was a waitress in a restaurant. I mean, for me, that's his private life and it doesn't come in here or there, but it's quite a strong story because it links a whole range of different things, and if it does turn out that money was given in a way that was against the rules, I think Nigel Farage will have great difficulties in sustaining his credibility.
And at the same time, I don't think it's mentioned in this story, but there are allegations that UKIP MEPs have not turned up enough to warrant the expenses they've claimed. So I think there are currently investigations into that.
Okay.
And I think if they are found guilty of wrongdoing on that front, then I don't think that will help them. I mean, I could care less what Nigel Farage does in his private life. I do care that he seems to have got us out of the EU. But it'd be interesting to see what happens to his reputation if any of this is proven.
OK, and as I say, he denies all the allegations around this, and as far as those investigations are concerned, he says they're fighting them very hard because they're absolutely not true, he says. Let's move on to the front page of The Observer. This is a story suggesting a big shift in Tory housing policy.
Well, I welcome this, actually. Theresa May is producing a white paper aiming to get a better deal for renters in this country, which I think is realistic. The traditional Tory ideal has been of a property-owning democracy, and I think many people do want to own their own homes, and most of us want to, and those of us who are lucky enough to have a mortgage, are grateful actually, because that's very much out of the reach of, certainly in the southeast, of most young people now. But the fact is it's incredibly expensive, particularly in London and the southeast, to buy property, and it is unaffordable. And people who rent often get a very bad deal. I know a few people who've been turfed out of their private rented accommodation a number of times with, and you have to save up for a deposit each time, and bang goes your annual holiday. And often accommodation is certainly overpriced, but also often substandard, and it's insecure. So I think if government are actually trying to tackle that, and they're talking about introducing family-friendly guaranteed 3-year tenancies, which sounds like a really good idea to me, then I think good for them.
Yeah, I quite like the idea of getting heavy on the sort of hidden charges that letting agents often throw into the contracts and the small print that suddenly you're liable to pay. In terms of long tenancies, would that not encourage landlords to have free deals with other people who want to have shorter tenancies? I just worry that there may be unintended consequences of that bit of the policy. Definitely don't think that the government should get in regulating the price in a free market. I mean, you say it's too expensive, but no, but you said that the prices are too high. Yes. The market has to decide that. So my sense is that certainly some of the stuff in this is good, but I do worry often that when you get too heavy in free exchange between people, you can create a whole set of unintended consequences.
And I think they were suggesting more house building for
Well, everyone always suggests more house building, but it hardly ever happens. And then it gets bought up by Chinese, millionaires. So it's all a bit difficult.
OK, very quick look at a Brexit story, because I don't think we've talked about Brexit, have we? We can't let that happen. Very quick look. This is a story inside the Mail on Sunday suggesting some trouble within the Tory party, potentially, as Brexit goes on.
Yes, well, I think various Tory MPs, including Ken Clarke, who gave a fantastic speech last week and was the only Tory MP to vote against the bill for the release of Article 50. He and Anna Soubry and Dominic Grieve and Nicky Morgan are among the people who say that that they will vote against a deal that allows for the possibility of us crashing out of the EU without a deal. So Theresa May made it very clear in her speech the other day that we are prepared to march out without any deal, which they argue, and I would agree with them, would do us an enormous amount of damage.
OK, I'm going to whiz us on, but we should note as well that Labour are divided as well over this issue, I guess.
And, yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense to me, this position. If there is a possibility of people saying the deal that you've got isn't as good as being in the EU, or if you haven't got a deal, we want to remain in the EU, then of course we're not going to get a deal because the rest of the EU member states want us to remain within the Union. So that seems to me like a crackers concept.
OK, I'm going to canter on.
You're using Nigel Farage's language.
Is that what he said?
Crackers was what he said about the affair.
And I was a Remainer.
I've sprinted on.
Yes.
I've jogged on.
Very good at it.
This is about I don't know what you call them without using the name of the what do you call it?
Gadgets.
Fitness tracker. That's
yes.
it.
Fitness tracker.
Without plugging one particular brand. That's the word I was after. Do they work or don't they?
Well, I don't use that. Do you use one of these? So it's meant to measure the number of steps you take, and if you get up to 10,000 a day, that's roughly 5 miles, and you can feel good about yourself and have a chocolate bar that they're going to take a chunk out of, apparently. That was a different story in the last hour. However, it turns out that the gadgets record false positives. So if you're sat down and you're not actually moving your feet, but you wave your hand around, they start clocking up miles.
I'm going to get one then.
It sounds brilliant, doesn't it?
Well, I'm delighted if I walk to the fridge or the kettle, so I think that's fine.
Walk to the fridge, that's great. To help yourself to more food. We must leave it there. Lovely to see you both. Thanks very much indeed for your selection today.